They called her the floating palace of the Philippines, a ship that promised not just transportation, but transformation. In a country scattered across thousands of islands, ferries like MV Doña Paz were lifelines. On December 20th, 1987, more than 4,000 passengers boarded this ship with dreams in their hearts and hope in their eyes. Most were returning home for the holidays. Families reunited, lovers reunited. Children pressed their cheeks against windows, watching the sun set across the South China Sea. But by the time the sun would rise again, the Doña Paz would become a ghost ship. And what happened that night would become the deadliest peacetime maritime disaster in recorded history. The Doña Paz departed from Tacloban City, bound for Manila. But along the way, it made a stop in Catbalagan, Samar. And this is where things started to go off script. The manifest said the ship carried 1,493 passengers. But eyewitnesses, survivors, and later investigations suggested otherwise. People boarded without tickets. Children slipped through gates. Entire families squeezed into cabins built for two. Estimates say over 4,300 people were on board. Most had no idea that the ship was only equipped with 1,493 life vests, not nearly enough to save even half the real number aboard. The Doña Paz cruised smoothly through the Visayan Sea, its lights gleaming in the night. Below deck, there were Christmas songs playing on an old transistor radio. The air smelled of salty wind, sweat, and anticipation. But none of them knew what was coming. It was just after 10 p.m. The sky was dark, starless. Somewhere near Damali Point in Tublas Strait, the Doña Paz was sailing silently. No radar, no proper radio communication. Just a ship loaded far beyond capacity, navigating the sea by dead reckoning. At the same time, another vessel moved quietly through the water. The MT Vector, an oil tanker carrying over 8,800 barrels of petroleum products, gasoline, and other highly flammable cargo. The Vector was unseaworthy. Its license had expired. It was understaffed, and its only qualified officer? Not on board. It drifted through the strait like a floating time bomb. At around 10:10 p.m., in total darkness, the Doña Paz and the Vector collided. In an instant, 8,800 barrels of gasoline ignited. The explosion lit up the night sky like a second sun. Fire erupted across the Doña Paz, crawling up walls, flooding corridors, devouring oxygen. The passengers had no time. Most of them were asleep. There were no life vests, no alarms, no emergency procedures. Panic spread faster than the flames. Survivors later described hell on water. People trampled each other. Mothers threw children overboard in desperation. The sea, black and unforgiving, became the only refuge. But even the water was on fire. Of the estimated 4,386 people on board, only 26 survived. Rescue efforts were delayed by hours. The Philippine Coast Guard didn't even know the ship had gone missing until the next morning. Bodies floated in the sea for days. Some were never found. Others burned beyond recognition. And the worst part? This was preventable. Entirely. Imagine floating in pitch-black water. Your skin burns from the flames. The oil sticks to your clothes. The screams grow fainter. Then, silence. Florencio M. Hablo was a 19-year-old college student heading back to Manila. He was on deck when the explosion hit. He remembers a blinding light, then being thrown into the water. I thought I was dreaming. But the heat told me it was real. I swam until my arms gave out. Then I just floated. He clung to debris for over 10 hours. He saw children drift past him, lifeless, mothers crying for help that never came. Another survivor, 14-year-old Rodel Lunas, remembered being dragged into the sea by his cousin, who didn't make it. Rodel lived. His cousin didn't. Many survivors were so traumatized, they refused to speak for years. The psychological scars were too deep, and the media moved on too fast. In the aftermath, some survivors were accused of fabricating their stories. Imagine surviving the worst maritime disaster in history and then not being believed. And still, every year on December 20th, they remember. Quietly, alone, they were the lucky ones. When the sun rose on December 21st, 1987, over the Sibuyan Sea, it didn't rise over celebration. It didn't rise over the shimmering blue of a hopeful holiday morning. It rose over a grave holding over 4,000 souls. And the worst part? Almost no one knew yet. Not the press, not the government, not the families. For hours, there was just silence. Deafening, bureaucratic, official silence. But soon, the truth would claw its way into the headlines, and when it did, it would unleash a storm of rage, grief, and national soul-searching that the Philippines had never seen before. At the Manila North Harbor, families waited. The Doña Paz was supposed to arrive at 6 a.m. People came with flowers, food, festive clothes for their loved ones returning from Leyte. But the dock remained empty, and then the rumors started. Someone whispered that there had been a delay. Then someone else heard there was an incident. By mid-morning, port officials gave vague statements. They had lost communication. The vessel was missing. Panic set in. By noon, radio silence was replaced by the screams of reality. The first official confirmation came from a local radio station on Mindoro after a few fishermen brought survivors ashore. Their stories were so outlandish, so horrific, some broadcasters refused to believe them. A ferry? Set ablaze? Hundreds, maybe thousands, dead? But within hours, more survivors began arriving in life jackets. Some were barefoot, some were burned, some could barely speak. But they all had one thing in common. They had escaped a floating inferno, and they were carrying a secret the nation wasn't ready for. Out of over 4,000 people on board, only 24 passengers survived, plus one crew member from the Doña Paz. Survivor Lauro Badiola, still in shock, whispered to reporters, "The water was on fire. I didn't know where to swim." Another survivor, Nestor Bernal, lost his wife and 3 children. "I was holding my son, and then I wasn't." They spoke of explosions, of dark figures leaping into flaming waters, of being ignored by crewmen who fled with the only lifeboats. There were no life vests, they said, no alarms, no drills, no help. That in the official manifest for the Doña Paz listed just 1,493 passengers. But that number was a lie. The ship had no proper ticketing system. Many passengers boarded without tickets. Others boarded as relatives of crew, last-minute additions, or simply illegally allowed on board. By some estimates, the real number of passengers was over 4,000. And it gets worse. Doña Paz was only certified to carry 1,518. It was overloaded nearly 3 times over. The most chilling part of survivor testimonies? No one saw the captain. No one saw the crew giving orders. Many survivors claimed the crew abandoned ship first. There were reports the bridge was unmanned at the time of the collision. The owners of the ship, Sulpicio Lines, initially denied this. They claimed the crew perished trying to help. But the lack of distress signal, no life jackets distributed, and zero rescue coordination paints another picture. One that looks less like tragedy and more like criminal negligence. President Cory Aquino called for an immediate investigation. A presidential task force was formed. The Philippine Coast Guard began compiling reports. But there was a problem. The Vector oil tanker, which collided with the Doña Paz, was unlicensed. Its crew was untrained, its ownership murky. It shouldn't have even been in the water. The 2 ships collided because neither was where they were supposed to be. Neither had proper communication. Neither had certified oversight. And yet, both were carrying hundreds of lives. The bodies that were recovered, about 1,000 in total, were badly burned, bloated, or unidentifiable. Most were buried in mass graves. Families wandered around, trying to identify loved ones from scorched clothing or jewelry. Mothers buried children without knowing if it was really them. Husbands buried wives based only on a pendant or wedding ring. The rest, over 3,000 souls, were never found. They rest beneath the Sibuyan Sea. Years later, a memorial was built in Dulag, Leyte, with the names of confirmed victims. But thousands remain unnamed. There were no Hollywood movies, no national holiday, no grand inquiry that brought anyone to full justice. The tragedy, like the ship itself, faded into silence. For many Filipinos, it's a wound that never healed, a chapter too painful to revisit. But for the families, it's every day. When you stand by the sea in Leyte or Mindoro today, it's hard to imagine that beneath those calm, silver-blue waves lie the ghosts of 1,000 Christmases. Fathers who never came home, children who never grew up, voices that still cry out, even if we stopped listening.